David Cameron is announcing a zero-tolerance stance towards protesters, something picked up from American experience. How effective do you think such measures will be there in the UK?
I think they'll be zero effective. This isn't something that can simply be battened off the streets with water cannon and plastic bullets. It isn't something that can be banned. It isn't something that will be got rid of by imposing draconian prison sentences. We've seen one teenage boy jailed for 6 months for stealing a £1.50 bottle of water. Now, I live in Hackney. I live right next to the Pembury estate, which was the main site of the riot this week. And I can tell you that if that happens, you can come back to the Pembury estate in a month or 2 months or 6 months or a year, and absolutely nothing will have changed. And therefore, the fundamental causes of the disturbances this week will remain.
Would also zero tolerance, a policy adopted by the police in future unrest, would that actually cause further problems between police officers and the community? As we've seen in the past, obviously, tough action by the police has caused a lot of further dissent.
Yes, I think that's exactly what would happen. Part of this, it's not the whole story, but part of the explanation for this is the already seething discontent with the police force, in particularly the black population in this country, but more generally as well. The untold story here is not just what happened to Mark Duggan, but the fact that this is a tip of an iceberg. When you know that there have been 300 deaths in police custody over less than a decade, you can see why people do not trust the police. On the estate that I mentioned here in Hackney, there was a dawn raid where somebody had their front door smashed in at 5:30 in the morning, just 2 days before the events took place. So these are some of the issues that have to be addressed, and simply giving the police more powers, as even the police have recognised to be fair, won't solve the problem.
So what are those other issues to be addressed, particularly from your anecdotal experience there in Hackney?
Well, everybody who lives in Hackney knows that the Pembury estate is one of the poorest estates in one of the poorest boroughs in the country. And it's not just the absolute or relative levels of poverty, it's the levels of inequality. In the United Kingdom now, there is greater inequality than at any point for the last 200 years. That is, you would have to go back to the days of the slave trade to find such a disparity between the rich and the poor. And this is in a society where the culture of commercialisation has run wild over the last 25 years. What do you expect if you show people repeatedly the most expensive consumer goods, tell them that their self-worth in life, that their respect from other people will be judged by the degree to which they can obtain these goods, and then deny them the ability to get them, either because the wages are so low, or because there are no jobs at all, or because of endemic poverty. This is the combustible material that's been building up at the bottom of British society for a generation now, and really the surprise is not that the riots happened, but that they hadn't happened before.
Let's talk about one of the reactions to these recent riots, and a measure Cameron has been talking about, saying that he's considering cutting offenders off from social networks. This is something that we're following here on RT. Now, one moment he's praising the likes of Facebook and Twitter as being tools for democracy in the Arab uprisings, and then he's coming out with this policy about censorship of those social networks. Is that preaching double standards, do you think?
It is preaching double standards, certainly, but it's also a form of extrajudicial punishment. There is no law in this country which allows the government to deprive people of the means of communication as punishment for being convicted of committing a crime. There is a justice system here. There is a process of trial by jury, and there are certain sentences which are handed out to people if they are found guilty. What the Prime Minister is doing is making up the law and making up the punishment regime as he goes along. Now, actually, that should be a crime for a leading politician to start suggesting that there are simply ad hoc, completely invented on the moment punishments that can be handed out for people is outrageous, and the social networks isn't the worst of it. There are already cases now of not people who committed crimes during the riots, but of the parents of people who committed crime during the riots being evicted from their council homes in a London borough because of what happened last week. Now, nobody has ever said that making somebody homeless is a suitable punishment for a crime.
Just finally, austerity measures. Also, the finger of blame has been pointed to those where the police haven't had enough resources to cope with this. Now, at the moment, while promising tougher crackdowns on those involved in the riots, the police are in some ways being handcuffed themselves by the lack of budgets. And indeed, Cameron has promised that they will continue to reduce the police budget. What effect could that have?
Well, I think the question of the austerity and the budget cuts and the relationship between those and the disturbances is much wider than the question of the police. We're looking in the borough of Tottenham, where the riots began. 13 out of 20 youth centres have been closed. There are virtually no apprenticeships in this country any longer. We're talking about unemployment rates of 25 to 50% in these areas. So if we're going to talk about places where the cuts ought to be halted, reversed, and money spent to stop this happening again, these are certainly some of the ones that I'd like to see addressed before we get on to the question of the police.
John Rees, we'll leave it there. Thanks very much for your thoughts. Thanks for joining us live there in London. John Rees, thank you.